I want you to ask yourself, what good is data if you don't know what it means? We have this hunger for knowledge. I see it all the time. People are reading more self-help books, listening to podcasts, going to talks, going and doing all of these things to gain more knowledge, more knowledge, more knowledge. But knowledge never actually converts to wisdom, because knowledge is awesome. Knowing something is great. Understanding it is something completely different. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Own It Show. I'm your host, Justin Roethlingshoefer, and it is so good to be back in Miami. As you can tell, we're back in the studio, and man, it feels good. It feels good. We've been on the road for the last 4 months, really heavy with speaking, heavy on tour with Brandon Lake and Pat Barrett and Franny Cash and Phil Wickham, and just being back at home and being able to be here in the studio is so amazing. But there's so much to be learned on the road, and there was so much to actually experience and a lot of these practical applications. And so I'm really excited to be able to now not only share them with you, but also just make sure that you get the insights, that you get the benefit of what does it look like from not only an educated scientist, sometimes I call myself, but somebody who actually lives it, somebody who's actually practically working through it. Because I remember back when I was playing hockey in college, and I used to be the guy that wore a heart rate monitor all the time while he played. And then after, would analyze the data, look at the different types of stress loads from practice, from games, from workouts, from different drills. And I'd be able to really easily tell how my body was recovering, what I needed to do next, because I was so in tune. I was not only intentional, but I understood my body. Like there was a deep level of wisdom for what was going on inside my body. And I still remember I remember this viscerally. It was our last game, obviously because we had lost. And I was getting my equipment, and I made this vow to myself because I had this deep fear. I had a deep fear that I would become like a lot of other coaches, a lot of other practitioners, a lot of other quote unquote experts who became disconnected from those that they were serving, became disconnected from those that they were ultimately trying to better, empower, equip, and ultimately educate. And I promised and I vowed to myself that I would never be like them, and I would never forget what it felt like to actually put in the work and do the thing. And so I say that because that's what I want you to know that you are getting here, is you're getting not only somebody who's gone through the copious amounts of years of institutional education, being able to actually do the work, so be a hands-on practitioner, but then also lives it himself, somebody that is day in and day out living this. And so if you're new here, welcome to the Own It Show. We aim to empower, equip, and educate you to take ownership of your health so you can realize your God-given potential and maximize what's already inside of you. Take back what's rightfully yours. What does that actually look like in order to step into our health? And so today we're diving into, I kind of hinted at it a little bit, but it's called the Wearable Conundrum. It's kind of what I speak to it as. And I see a lot of this within our clientele as they get so focused on having a perfect outcome, so focused on having something that is the picture of optimal, and they're continually chasing optimal. And when you're chasing optimal, you're never actually living optimal. And so what does that look like in order to really step in and find something new and realize a breakthrough in this? Because not too long ago, so in between my travel, I've done 37 of the last 51 days on the road. And I don't say that to brag, because I don't think anybody should ever brag about the grind that they're on. But what I am very proud of is I am proud of the intentionality of how I acted and how I lived over the course of those last 51 days. But if you look at my data went up, my data went down, my data went up, my data went down. It shifted. There were some days that I was sleeping on a tour bus where it was shaking every single night as we were driving. And then there was other nights that I was sleeping in a hotel. And then there was other nights that I was in my own bed next to my wife. And if you look at the nights that I was at home, always better sleep. If you look at the nights that I was on the road, it always fluctuated. But here's the important thing, is it gave me insights as to how I could start to improve those sleeps. It gave me insights as to what I should start to do the next day. It gave me insights as to the importance taking control of my calendar and making sure that I'm appropriately prioritizing and putting boundaries up so that I could ultimately serve at the highest level. And I think the issue with a lot of us is kind of like what I ran into George with. George was a guy at one of my keynotes in Atlanta, and he came up to me and we were talking about HRV and sleep quality, and just he was biggest thing he said, he just felt like he was stuck. Felt like he was stuck, didn't know what to do, wasn't seeing any change in HRV, didn't even know what sleep quality was. He just always looked at his percentage of recovery on his Whoop band, and he was just really frustrated because he goes, I don't feel like I'm getting any better. When we sat, I started to ask him, so what are you doing every day? He's like, I'm doing everything. I'm cold plunging, I'm intermittent fasting, I'm working out really hard. I got the Sleep 8 mattress, or I got the blackout shades. I'm not eating 3 hours before bed. I'm doing all the things, but I'm not seeing any change. And when we really sat down and started to say, okay, how do we now shift some of these behaviors based on what your data is saying? Maybe some of the things that people have told you are healthy actually aren't working for you, and the big rocks you're missing and forgetting. And so we started to actually take some things out. We started to take out the cold plunging when his HRV was below his 10-day average. We started to actually have him have a boundary for work and actually connect intentionally with his wife and kids at night. We made sure that when he was getting up in the morning, that he wasn't getting up at 4:30 in the morning like he was. We actually bumped it to 5:30 and just reorganized some things in his morning so he could get everything done that he wanted to. We just reoriented some priority sets, shifted some things, and lo and behold, within 2 weeks, his HRV was up again, his sleep quality was up, and he was actually feeling so much better. And I think that right there is, in of itself, one of the coolest things that we've been able to see, because it changes how we think. It changes how we operate. It changes when we have wisdom for what we're going for. And so what we're going to talk about today is that tools don't create the transformation, but rather interpretation does. Because interpretation is ultimately what leads us to wisdom, and wisdom is what creates the massive change. So I want you to ask yourself, what good is data if you don't know what it means? I think we think about this all the time, where if you own a business, you have all of this great data coming in on how many clients you have, on your top line revenues, on your bottom line expenses. You're going to be asked for your profit margin. You're going to be asked for, in marketing, what your average ad spend is, what your click-through rate is, what your conversion rate is, what your retention rate is, what your lifetime value of a client is, so that you can ultimately make some very powerful decisions in what you say yes to and what you say no to. What's a good deal? What's a bad deal? You've probably educated yourself in these because there's a financial investment to that, or there's a financial gain to that. But you're not an expert when it comes to your health unless you've never actually looked at data. And just because you don't know what it means, you've just continually to operate and look at numbers, but not understanding. And without understanding is where the decay starts to happen, because we continue to do things that don't get us to where we need to go. I love it in Hosea 4:6. It says, my people perish for a lack of knowledge. When we think about this knowledge, we have this hunger for knowledge. I see it all the time. People are reading more self-help books, listening to podcasts, going to talks, going and doing all of these things to gain more knowledge, more knowledge, more knowledge. But knowledge never actually converts to wisdom, because knowledge is awesome. Knowing something is great. Understanding it is something completely different. I'll pause there because that's really critical for us to know and understand. It's one thing to know, it's another thing to understand. Knowledge is important. Wisdom is knowledge in application. And so how do we get there? What does this look like? What do we actually start to do? Because wisdom comes from understanding what we see from technology, not just simply using the technology. We have to understand it. We have to have that pathway. And so when we think about your wearable devices, it's not enough just to throw it on your wrist, throw it on your finger, throw it on your chest, and ultimately just go. But what we have to know and understand are these 4 key metrics. If we don't know these 4 key metrics, we don't understand these 4 key metrics, wearables have no use case or application in our life. And so the big 4 are these. We've got number 1, you've heard it here time and time and time again, heart rate variability, HRV. Ultimately, what this is reflecting is how well your body is adapting to stress. It is the single most important metric when understanding how well your body is adapting to stress. Holistic view of health. mental, physical, spiritual, emotional, real, perceived, positive, negative, future, past, present, stress. The body doesn't know the difference. HRV is that language. It's that conversion metric that gets us understanding and knowing. Second, VO2 max. VO2 max is the language of our body that's communicating how efficient we're using oxygen. Now, in our wearable devices, they will be an estimation, but it's still something that we can go off of. It's still something we can look at and say, hey, whereabouts are we? Thirdly, sleep quality. Again, the language of how well our body is detoxifying, how well our body is actually in rhythm. The biggest and most important rhythm in our entire life, the circadian rhythm, it's telling us how well our body's interacting with it and allowing it to detoxify so that we can also be operating at a higher level. And thirdly, or fourthly, is respiration rate and or resting heart rate. You can look at both. Resting heart rate, again, how low does our heart rate get every single night? Great indicator, goes hand in hand with heart rate variability, but with how much stress we're under. And then respiratory rate, the reason I throw that one in there is because when we start to increase respiratory rate, we can usually see about 24 hours later that there is some type of sickness, illness, delayed fatigue that starts to come on. Why is it number 5th on my list? Because HRV predicate 2 or 3 day decrease in HRV. I guarantee you on day 3, maybe day 4, you'll see an increase in rise in resting heart rate. So it's again, an earlier sign. Why do I talk about these? Because so often when you look at your wearable device, you don't even know where HRV is. I was talking at a group in Memphis last week, and we were talking about their wearable devices, and not 5 seconds after I brought up HRV, somebody goes, where do I find my HRV? All I know is my recovery score. And all these wearable devices will put together an algorithm, a recovery score, a regeneration score, a readiness score, a strain score, a sleep score. I don't care about scores. You guys have to get the scores out of your mind. I want you to unlearn everything that you so thought or was taught intuitively as to what to do. But I want to teach you to come back and look at the raw numbers, because an algorithm is something man-made. An algorithm is something that other people put together in a series of equations to get to some given outcome that gives them an IP that then creates value for them, not for the end user. So they strategically market to you that this makes it easier, but consequently, it actually makes it more confusing, because I don't know what a readiness score is. How did you determine if I was ready or not? How did you determine if I was prepared or not? How did you determine if I was recovered or not? But what I know is I know what my body communicates. I know what my body is saying when I look at my HRV and my HRV is low. I know what it's saying. I know what my body's saying when I understand and know sleep quality metrics. I know what my body is saying when suddenly I look at my VO2 and my VO2 is very low. I know what my body's communicating. I know it. It's effective. And because those are absolute metrics, single metrics that are literally coming from our body, we can start to understand it in a much better way. And so I want to highlight some of the importances here. When we get to HRV, guys, I cannot tell you how important this is. Throw every other metric out that is algorithmically based and go solely to HRV. Back in the year 2000, there was a meta-analysis exploring HRV as a predictor of all-cause death and cardiac mortality across multiple studies. That's 32 studies, over 38,000 participants. And what they found was that lower HRV associated with a higher risk of all-cause mortality death. Pause there. A lower HRV is associated with a higher risk all-cause mortality death. Okay, so an example, reduced short-term HRV predicted higher cardiovascular mortality across any other independent risk factor variable. Meaning that if you smoked, it didn't matter. If you were obese, it didn't matter. If you were in a lower income demographic, it didn't matter. Lower HRV meant that you had a higher risk of all-cause death and cardiac mortality. It's incredible. It's incredible when you start to think about this, because HRV is literally the longevity metric. And so you'd think that we would start to get really focused on this, but we've just been so discombobulated with all these different algorithms that we start to really not understand what we're going through, not really understanding what we're looking at. And when we don't understand it, we can't step into it. And so when we think about what wearables do tell us and what they should be used for. Number one is they tell us our stress load, HRV. Number two, they tell us the impact of training, VO2 max. Number three, they tell us our sleep quality windows, thus sleep quality. Number four, they tell us our lifestyle rhythms quality. How well are the habits, behaviors, and lifestyle rhythms we are engaging in adapting to our health? Are they helping or are they hurting? Are they enhancing or are they restricting? And then it gives us insight into those early illness trends. I talked about that, resting heart rate and respiratory rate specifically. This is what we can start to use this for. What they don't tell you is they don't tell you what your worth is. They don't tell you whether you should shame yourself. They don't tell you if you're a failure, if your calling or your identity is wrong, whether you should grind harder. And most importantly, what it doesn't tell you is it doesn't tell you how to apply it. Yes, they're putting AI and metrics into all these things, but guess what AI metrics don't have? They don't have context. They don't have context that you're building a business. They don't have context that you're under a timeline to get your work done. They don't have context that you have a kid that got up in the middle of the night that was sick. They don't have context that you and your spouse have been fighting for a week, and thus the emotional and mental stress that have gone on with that is what's causing the downward trend, not the fact that you have to skip your workout today and that you just have to relax and that you should go to bed 45 minutes earlier, even though you're going to bed at 9 o'clock at night every single night. Like, it doesn't know these things. And so this is where knowledge and wisdom collide. This is where the big gap happens. You may know these things. You're being told these things. You've seen these numbers, but you've never understood them. And so I want to give you some insights and a little bit of just context or some things that you can kind of bring around to these things. And most importantly, how we improve heart rate variability. So when we think about this, right? When we think about this, there's this rule that I sit into that I've always done on myself. Even again, when I first started this, man, I love this, right? Is I was the guy, Elise hated this, but I was the guy that had 16 wearables on at once. I had the heart rate strap, I had the rings, I had the wrist straps, I had little dongles that went on the finger. Actually, I had brainwave sensors. I had all of these things that I was looking at. One, to understand the accuracy, but two, just to understand the data better. And so I want you to understand this 3-trend rule, okay? 3-day trend rule. And if you can really understand the 3-day trend rule, then you're going to start to be able to apply much better. So the first thing is never react to a single number. If HRV goes up one day, amazing. Ask yourself what occurred the previous day in order for that to happen. Get really, really granular. And you have to think mentally, emotionally, physically, and spiritually. It's not just one-dimensional. The second thing is you only, O-N-L-Y, only, you only react to patterns. Only react to patterns. So do you see HRV rising on the weekends? Well, what are you doing over the course of the weekend, or what are you doing as the weekend arrives that you can start to implement in through the week? Are you noticing HRV rises exponentially on days that you just happen to miss a workout? Well, could it be that you're actually not training correctly? Could it be that you're putting yourself at a cardiovascular and muscular disadvantage because of how you're training, and thus you should probably be doing something different? Is it that you only see HRV rises on Mondays? Interesting. What happens over the course of the weekend that doesn't work for your HRV? Is it that you don't sleep well at home and you only sleep well in hotels? Great. What's happening in hotels that's not happening at home? Start to ask these questions. And so when we stop reacting to a single number and we start reacting to patterns, it gives us a much better framework for how to make decisions. And then to sum this whole thing up, what I want you to do is I want you to take a look at 1, 2, 3 days past trend lines all the time. That should be like your guiding light. What happened the last 3 days? Where was I? What did I do? What did my body react to? What is it saying? Because you start to get a really great holistic picture. You start to really understand what's actually happening. And AI can't tell you this. A report can't tell you this. Only your body can tell you that. And it's requiring you to understand and see things differently. You have to realize you're fearfully and wonderfully made so uniquely, made so complexly. But when we actually start to understand the simple languages, heart rate variability, sleep quality, VO2 max, we start to take ownership of our health. We start to understand how our lifestyles, our habits, the behaviors, and the rhythms in our life have a massive impact and influence on how we show up, how we feel, and how we operate day in and day out. So use these tools as simply that, tools to understand your body, not to abandon it, not to be the end all be all, not to tell your body what it feels, but rather to be able to interpret the language of what's going on. Because when you start to have this level of knowledge and wisdom, it's going to empower you far beyond what any doctor, far beyond what any individual, far beyond what any person could ever do for you. So at the end of the day, we know success is different. So own your different. And we'll see you guys next week.